Hello and welcome to the Road from Emmaus podcast. I'm Jason Lowe, joined by Andrew Chow, and we are two totally ordinary Catholic guys hoping to share our journeys. Like the disciples on the road to Emmaus, we've each encountered Christ in our lives. Join us as we talk about what comes next. Andrew and I end off the year with a bit of a fun episode as we go through our list of pet peeves and pro tips relating to behaviours we have in Mass, as well as a couple other general ones. As much as this is a fun episode though, the most important part is at the end, so make sure you stay tuned until then. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, stay safe, and be well. It has been quite a while. It's been almost a month since our last episode. We had several rescheduling with each other, rebookings. Even today, we had to do a little bit of a bumping and a little bit of a rescheduling. So, thanks to our listeners. I'm sure you've been waiting for bated breath for this next episode. But appreciate your patience. We are back. We're back with, I think, what will likely be our last episode of the calendar year 2021. I don't know why I said calendar year 2021. It's the accountant in me. Sorry. It's a difference between calendar year and fiscal year. I'm just used to saying it like that. But yeah, no, it's, I think this episode we're gonna make it a little bit more of a fun one, likely in the intro or through the episode title, you guys already know what it'll be about, but, we want to have a little bit of fun with our last episode here, and, at the same time, hopefully it'll be a little bit of education, some might call it edutainment, not to rip off from, certain people in the sports world that I follow, but, that's what we're hoping for today. But before we get into that, were you going to say something, Andrew? Or?
I've never heard that before. It actually took me a second to be like, wait, he said something there that wasn't just entertainment.
Yes, I combined the words education and entertainment. Shout out to Tim and Sid, just so that they know I'm not ripping off them, in case they ever hear of us or something. But last year at this time, Andrew, we did a year in review episode, and I do think it would be good to kind of start. I know I'm kind of springing this on you, but that's what I always do with you anyway. So it would be good to start with a little bit of not a full year in review for 2021 or calendar year 2021. But I think kind of, maybe the biggest, I don't know if it's the biggest event or the biggest sharing or the biggest reflection that you feel like you had from this year. Obviously, I feel like it might be related to you getting married. I don't know. I won't speak on your behalf. But I can start just to give you a little bit of time to think of it. And I know in our Thanksgiving episode in October, I spoke about, being thankful for my friends and family and the people that the Lord has placed around me. So that continues to be the same sentiment. Just I think it's been just something that has continued on for the Lord, giving me Jen and placing her in my life, just because, this past year has been kind of our first full year together and everything. And then obviously being grateful for my family and my friends, like I said. I don't want to rehash that again, though. I just want to, let everyone know that I'm still grateful for the people in my life. But I think the other thing that might be on my mind is just, the whole COVID pandemic. And I think, I guess in general for myself, just, being lucky enough to be healthy, being lucky enough to not have been so closely affected by COVID, like a lot of people that you and I know, just a lot of people across the world who have been kind of negatively affected. And it's really taken a toll on them. And so for me, I am grateful that so far, at least, that hasn't been as prevalent in my life. But at the same time, on the flip side, I continue to pray for, people like my girlfriend, who's a nurse, all the healthcare workers, all the people who have been affected by the pandemic, whether directly or indirectly. I think there's a necessary message of hope during this particular Advent season. I think by the time people listen to this episode, maybe it'll be Christmas, maybe it'll be just past Christmas. But I would also still say, let's not give up hope, right? Like I heard somewhere, maybe it was a reputable source, don't know. But I heard somewhere that it might not be until 2024 until we fully eradicate this thing. So I think we are in this for kind of the long haul. And, maybe we need to learn how to work within it, work within COVID and figure out what it is that we need to do to kind of adjust to this new life. But within all of that, right, the great promise of this Advent season is that, Jesus, our Lord, will bring us through whatever darkness it is that we face. He has before, he will in the future, and he is now, right? For anyone who has endured kind of their own personal sufferings, this is kind of a personal suffering as well. Personal to each and every one of us in our own, little nuanced ways, but also collectively as society, as God's children, right? Our Lord is leading us through it. So don't give up hope. I think we are making upward momentum, and we'll get there. We'll get there somehow. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but we'll get there somehow.
No, for sure. And I think that's a great message. I think just to bounce off you a little bit with what's been happening with COVID, I think it's really easy to fall into this feeling that things are getting really tough and things are really, really dreary and dire and what have you. I actually remember I had a conversation with my dad, and he was saying to me, he's like, Andrew, it feels like the devil's winning the battle. And I was like, you know what? I know why you feel that way. But the reality is that this back and forth has been happening all the way through history, and the promise is that Jesus will come out triumphant, right? So, don't lose that faith, don't lose that hope. Just because some things are more visible now doesn't make the invisible things, like, for example, cloistered nuns praying for us, any less real. So, so I think, it's definitely a great message of hope. For me this year, definitely it's been the marriage thing is definitely the biggest one, right? So I think in a sense, rediscovering the concept of vocation and understanding it at a deeper level, I think that's probably the biggest thing. Not with just getting married, but now being married. I think that's probably even bigger than getting married, if that makes any sense.
Of course, yeah.
So I think being married now, it's been really, really interesting and really I guess awe-inspiring, really, to see the way that grace has moved through my life. I don't remember if I mentioned it on the pod before, but I'd always generally had the concept that I want to have a family, but then after getting married, it was really noticeably different than wanting to be a dad, and these kinds of things. So it's been really, really interesting, and yeah, just kind of buckling in for the rest of the journey. But it's been really, really great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just, being married is totally different than getting married, I think. We probably talked about this on one of our podcasts, but, newsflash, everyone, your love relationship doesn't end, your vocation doesn't end on the day you get married, right? That's just the beginning. And so it's beautiful to see you and Cherry living that out, and just hearing your stories and sharings and all that. So yeah, I think that's awesome. And with that, why don't we just get into something else that's awesome, that being today's podcast episode, which is about pet peeves and pro tips. Those are awesome things that we want to share with you guys. I think, like I said, just to have a bit of a fun episode, just observations that, Andrew and I have made, throughout our faith journey. That we think it would be good for people to kind of understand. There is a bit of a underneath all of this. There are things that I think there are probably legitimate considerations when we get into them. So without further ado, why don't we just kind of go through our list here of pet peeves and pro tips, and I'll kind of start with the biggest one for me. Pet peeves. I will go back to prefacing. So more ado instead of without further ado. A lot of these are surrounding just the Mass in general, but I think Andrew will kind of shoot in a few, general, broader pet peeves and pro tips throughout the episode. So just to kind of set that context, a lot of these are relating to just the Mass. And so this first one that I have here, listed as a pet peeve, is applauding after Mass. So I have a lot of thoughts on this one. Just it's something that I've noticed has started in the last, I want to say, 5 to 7 years. And when it first started, I was really confused. I remember being like, why is everyone applauding? And I was just a kid at the time, right? So I was probably in my early 20s, late teens kind of thing. And I was definitely not as invested in my faith at the time. So I was legitimately just confused. And kind of over time, as it became more and more of a thing, it just became something that I still to this day am not really, I don't know, something that I'm supportive of, I guess, if I were to say. I just think it's weird because what exactly are we applauding for, right? Yeah. And almost always, it's usually for for the music ministry, for the choir, who are awesome. Like again, I mentioned this on the past before. On past podcasts before. But I've been in music ministry myself. Music, like specifically music ministry, is a bit of a passion for myself, and I just don't think that they need to be applauded after Mass, right? Like so many of our episodes, actually very relevant to literally just the episode we had previously when we had Eric Wong on, and we talked about the Latin Mass. We talked about how beautiful music is. We talked about how talented the people who are singing or playing the instruments need to be. And we need to remember that, music is probably a really important part of our prayer, because it is prayer. It's intended to be prayer. It's intended to lift our worship up in a beautiful artistic way towards our Lord. And so that's actually kind of the crux of the thing for me, where, the music, the choir is intended to kind of direct our worship towards the Lord. They are not the centerpiece of the worship themselves.
The music isn't the point.
Exactly. So, thank you. So, it's kind of like, why are we applauding for the choir, right? At the very end. And, if you're in music ministry listening to this, I would just kind of invite you to kind of consider that at the very least, right? Like, again, you do a great job, right? I have a passion for music ministry, but I don't necessarily have all the talent for music ministry. But whether it's for music, I've brought this up with other people in the past, and sorry, this is quickly becoming a longer rant, but I brought this with other people in the past. And, sometimes people will respond with like, oh, we could just be applauding for the Mass in general, but it's kind of like, well, the Lord doesn't necessarily need applause after Mass, if it's for that in general. And when it comes to, if it is for the music, like why aren't we kind of, lauding and praising all the other people in ministries who help out with the Mass, right? Like the priest himself, or the altar servers, or the people who are reading reading the readings. That's redundant. All of those people, the ushers, right, who are there to also serve.
Yeah, I've actually been went to Mass once where it was actually the priest who, in that spirit, called out all the other ministries for applause as well. It was so weird. It was like when you go to a concert and they're like Pino Palladino on the bass.
Yes.
It was the weirdest thing. But I totally agree, and I think like the crux of it for me, or the best way to summarize it for me, is like Mass isn't a show. You applaud after shows, right? And you know what? Like, to the people who say maybe we're just applauding the Mass, like, respectfully, I'd say, do you applaud after a good prayer too? Like, it's just, it's not. That's not it. So I think at the end of the day, Mass isn't a show. It's about God. It's not about any of us. And if I can be a little bit direct, if you're in music ministry and you're listening to this and you feel a little bit attacked, you kind of should. Because it's a little bit of a gut check, like for real. Because I also was in music ministry. I was in a music ministry that was particularly showy, if I'm honest, right? So this is just growing up. This is what I knew, and it was very showy, and I liked it when I was in the ministry because it's like, oh my gosh, like we're great, we're getting applause every week, and then one day I was like, man, like why am I so worried about whether I'm getting applause or not? This is all turning into how well am I singing for me, not how well am I singing for God. And that was a gut check for me. So, like if you feel a little attacked, like you kind of should, if you feel that way. And it's, I think probably like we've probably both been there. I've definitely been there. And it's just, move forward.
Having been in music ministry myself, actually leading music ministry, I have absolutely been way too preoccupied with like the logistical parts of it, being like, hey, like the slideshow isn't showing up, or like it's not advancing or something, or like that's just for praise and worship. But like within the context of Mass, it's kind of like I'm not there spiritually, mentally, I'm there physically. But I'm not, aware of the readings. I'm not aware of the homily. I'm thinking about like, hey, if we're in the homily, we need to sing the offertory hymn next, kind of thing. Yeah. And it's kind of like I'm flipping to those pages, and it can be, it's distracting, and it takes away from from the point of the mass, like you said. And so, yeah, I think that's just something I wanted to kind of get off my chest, I suppose. My apologies for what was quickly a rant that was going off the rails. But I on a serious note, right? Like, I think it's something to kind of keep in mind if this is something that, is you're kind of doing now, because everyone has been doing it for years and years. It's kind of like stop and think and be like, well, why exactly am I doing it, and for what purpose? How does it actually direct me to the Lord, kind of thing. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I actually had kind of along the same lines with music. One pet peeve of mine actually is the piano noodling when the song ends early. If the song's done, the song's done. Like, you don't, you don't need to fill every non-speaking moment of mass with music.
Yes.
I think there's something to be said about silence. Again, back to the TLM episode we had. That kind of bugs me when people just need to go into that. Just silence is fine.
Yeah, whether it's the silence itself or whether it's the singing that kind of goes on, I've definitely witnessed where, like the hymn the hymn is the hymn and it's fine. And again, I think maybe just to quickly hedge ourselves or whatever, music within mass is a beautiful thing because it is intended to be prayer. It is intended to be a form of worship and prayer. So that's something obviously we are very supportive of. But when, the priest has finished with setting up the altar and the offertory hymn is going on for another 2 verses and 2 choruses, it's kind of like, again, like, what is the point here, right? What is the point? Are we just making everyone wait for the mass to continue on? Are you drawing all of the attention to yourself because you're the only ones doing anything in that moment? I've actually been in a mass before. It was a long time. It was just once where the music was going on for too long, and I think the priest was kind of just giving a side eye to the choir kind of thing. So I think that's also a consideration. Is the music ultimately, whether it's the first thing that I said or this one, is it distracting from the point of the mass? Is it taking away from being reverent within mass or within the context of worshiping, right? Now I will say, actually, so I just went to daily mass. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago. I think it was yesterday, and the people were singing a hymn, and it was just daily mass. There was no instruments or anything. And it did go on a little longer than I expected, but I was struck by the beauty of how I really got the vibe that people were just praying. They were just singing for the purpose of praying the words. And so for me, I was kind of thinking within the context of our episode. I was like, I should really bring this up because it's kind of the vibe that comes off of it, right?
It's true. I think there's a difference between finishing a hymn because it's the hymn and filling in music because you want to fill in music. And I think if we're all honest, we can tell the difference. If an example would be if you're talking about that instance where it's during the offertory and you're singing Panis Angelicus, you don't just end in the middle because the priest is done.
Fair.
So fine. But yeah, sometimes it's the noodling. It's when people reprise the whole song on the piano again and again and again because of X thing. Because let's say it was a short hymn and this preparation of the gifts is happening, and it's just you can be silent. That's all.
For sure. So in speaking about noise and silence, I think this one's going to be a quick one. I always notice when people bring down the kneeler too loudly. It just echoes around the entire church, and it's really not that hard to work your quad muscles or your hamstring muscles or whatever it is, your gluteus maximus muscles, and just tense them up a little bit more and bring down the kneeler just a little more quietly. And the whole point of this isn't to just be hey, stop making a racket, I'm an old man yelling at the cloud kind of thing. But I think a lot of everything I've already brought it up goes back to being reverent. And I think we're going to go into this in a little bit, but just think about how much noise it's like if you heard that through the mic, through your speakers, that's what it sounded like. I just pounded my desk in case you didn't hear. And it really distracts and it's unnecessary, right?
Yeah.
If you're bringing down the kneeler really loudly, what I've seen people do is, during the Sanctus or during the Holy Holy, they will bring it down in the middle of the hymn so that it's not as distracting. That's something I like. Another kind of, I guess, pro tip for this is that, like, don't bring it back up after the first time you kneel, I guess, because you're going to have to kneel again afterwards. So you might as well save yourself that extra noise.
For the Our Father, for anyone who's wondering, it's when you stand up for the Our Father, you don't need to lift it back up.
Thank you. Yeah, so, this one's really quick. It is a personal pet peeve. I don't actually think anyone that I know has ever brought this up, but it's always something that I
it's actually, so it's really funny, because for me, it's not a pet peeve. It's actually, growing up, it's the noise, like, I don't know what it was, but I didn't know the parts of the Mass, but I could hear after a priest said something, I could hear, like, the kneelers in my head, and I'm like, okay, we're kneeling now. Yeah. It's like, cause it just happens so many times, or like you can hear, like, everyone standing. It's like, okay, this is the part where we stand up.
Yeah.
So, like, growing up, like, knowing the cues for what to do when was never just me actually knowing the parts of the Mass. It was just from hearing the priest say something, I would hear in my head the sound of kneelers dropping. I was like, okay, it's a kneeling time. It was just really random, but anyways.
You've been conditioned.
I have been, yes.
Yeah. That moves us past the pet peeves. I think for me at least, those were kind of the more obvious ones, and more in good fun. But I think a lot of this, whether it's pet peeves, whether it's pro tips, whether it's just even relating to our Latin Mass episode from last time with Eric, a lot of worship and a lot of Mass relates to being reverent, right? Mm-hmm. So again, pro tips when you're entering the sanctuary or entering the church. We're taught this from probably if you go to a Catholic elementary school, like from the time you are a kid, whether it's or First Communion, whether it's confirmation, whether it's from your parents, genuflect, right? Genuflect towards the tabernacle. The reason for this is because, it's not just like a triggered motion that we do as soon as we enter the church. The reason for this is to show your reverence for Jesus, show your deference towards our King. Mm-hmm. I think, it's a simple gesture that really kind of humbles yourself, right? If you think about the act of going down on either both knees or one knee, it's not an act that we usually do on a day-to-day basis. Usually we're standing, usually we're sitting, but we really only ever kneel for things where we are offering ourselves to the person that we're kneeling towards. So in the context of proposing in marriage, right? When you got down on one knee for Cherry, you were offering yourself, all of yourself, in a humble position for Cherry, and be like, hey, this is all of me. Take me to spend the rest of your life with me, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, when we enter the sanctuary at church, genuflecting is something where we are saying to Jesus, hey, it's just a 1 second motion. It's just a 2 second motion. But I'm showing you that I recognize you as my King. I recognize you as my Creator. You are my God, and I'm here for you. I'm here to offer myself to you and to participate in this Mass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. I think it's... we talked about this briefly, I don't remember when, but it's these little actions, they actually go a long way as well to, like, just reminding your body of where you are and what you're doing. So I think we talked about it in the TLM episode, actually. But yeah, I think it goes a long way. And this goes through, just taking another one of your pro tips, this goes through the different parts of the Mass as well, as doing the right thing. So sitting, standing, kneeling. It's important to do. It's important to do it when you ought to do it, and to understand why, right? So, for example, when we kneel, basically when we're kneeling in the Mass is when Jesus is present. And it's like the shortest way to say it is when when the consecration happens and Jesus is present. The things that we can do in those times, technically, I believe, is kneel and stand. We shouldn't be sitting. So this is... it's an important way to, again, have that deference, right? And just I bring up the sitting or the kneeling and the standing just because one thing that I think a lot of people from our parents and even grandparents' generation, I don't think they know that you have the option to either kneel or stand.
Yeah.
And then some people have really bad knees. So if you have bad knees, you can stand.
Yeah.
So the point is to be at attention. So just like a little tip there, if anyone has bad knees, like there is an option other than sitting for you to do, and in a standing. So yeah, I think it's just doing the right physical thing at the right time.
And that's actually what I wanted to get at is like I know one person who like bless her, like she has osteoporosis, so she's I guess a more senior lady, and she always insisted on kneeling during mass, and you could literally see that it was painful for her, and people would tell her, be like, hey, like you don't need to do that, but I guess it was her own personal act of faith to be like, hey, I can withstand this small amount of pain, which probably wasn't that small, to worship my Lord. Now that being said, not everyone needs to do that. I think what we want to touch on is the idea of sitting versus standing. If you're unable to kneel but you are able to stand, that would be recommended over sitting, I think, just because sitting is typically seen as more of a passive action. Whereas, like you said, standing, you're more at attention. It's not rude to stand while other people are kneeling. I know some people are just like, I don't want to stand because I don't want to like.
You feel self-conscious. You do.
Yeah, you want to be self-conscious, which is totally fair. You don't want to get in the way of people's sight lines of the Lord, which is totally fair. But you know what else is totally fair is that the most important thing is your posture towards our Lord. And so if you're standing to show that you are at attention, and obviously if you're physically able to, then that's actually probably recommended, in lieu of kneeling at least. So wanted to share that as well as kind of a pro tip, just in case anyone isn't aware. So thanks for bringing that one up. Now I want to talk about something that a lot of people probably, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people automatically, this one kind of grates their inner nerves or whatever. But I think tolerance for children and babies is often something that a lot of people bring up as a pet peeve. And I am kind of choosing to not list this as a pet peeve for the reason that children and babies are, like, they need to be seen as beautiful, as the beautiful children and babies of God that they are, right? Not as nuisances, not as annoyances. Like, we were all there. We were all babies at some point. We were all crying at some point. We were all at that point in our lives, very, very young, where we had no idea what was going on. We were just bored, or we were just straight up babies, and we literally just didn't know what was going on at all. I would say, if you're someone who, maybe it just comes naturally to you, where it's tough for you to hear the cry of a baby, and that can be, I haven't been there. I'm sure, at some point in my life, I will be like, I will find it very tough to hear the cry of a baby. But I think, in those moments, try to pray for a little bit of patience, right? Recognize that that a lot of these children and babies, like, these are people that we want to be the future of our church. And we're called to lead them. And I think someone in response to this one is, we don't blame the children or the babies at all, but it could be in the hands of the parents to, like, take them outside, et cetera, et cetera. I think I'm trying to be reasonable here in the sense of, like, I'm sure there's a line, right? Like, if they're, like, really, really screaming and truly distracting from, the worship, the reverence, the point of the mass, then sure, like, let's be considerate of that. Let's take them outside and calm them down a little bit. But if it's just a little cry here or there kind of thing, or even a moderate cry, and you're able to kind of quickly calm them down and whatnot, like, I think there's a call for all of us to show a bit more tolerance towards at least that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's really finding that balance. I think, on both sides, we need to make sure that we're understanding of what's happening, right? So I think for sure, like, really newborns, at the end of the day, like you said, they're the life of the church. They're the future of the church. And we need to be respectful of that. And there's an element of charity here as well, right? It's not, mass isn't about you. So let's calm down a little bit. Mm-hmm. But on the flip side, as parents, it's also like, like, you can also do your part. I think there are some situations where parents let their children get away with a little bit too much. So what an example would be giving children doodle books in mass. Like, that annoys me. Mm-hmm. So, doing your part to actually show your children the importance of reverence at mass, right? So to me, if the parent is doing their part, and if it's reasonable to do so, then yeah, we should be tolerant. If the parent is being negligent, then yeah, I think you have a case to be annoyed. And I think we need to find kind of the charity in both situations to make sure that we're conscious of the people around us. But a really funny thing here is like, there's a priest that I know who he used to make announcements saying, hey, if you have a baby and they're gonna cry, take them outside. Like, it's gonna distract me from giving my homily. And one of his friends actually said to him, Father, baby or no baby, you're still Jesus to this congregation. And it was like a whoa moment for that priest. And you know, that's kind of what you're getting at. And I think that's kind of the point. Is like, you know what? Like, we're here to be there for Jesus. It's not really about who's next to us necessarily. So let's remind ourselves of that. And there's also something to be said about, you know, knowing your environment, right? Every church will have a mass that's, you know, kind of more for the families. If you go to that mass, know what you're getting yourself into, you know. And then if you're a parent and you know that your child is a little bit more raucous, like, yeah, like, go to that mass, you know? So it's kind of, again, I think that the charity in all cases, the consideration for your neighbor is really important here. But yeah, like, everyone, you know, there's no fine line or there's no black and white to me here. It's just really, everything is about, am I being considerate of my neighbor?
I think something that is a black and white peeve of yours is relating to prayer. Do you want to bring that one up?
So one of my biggest pet peeves, this is outside of mass, is when people name their prayers before they pray them. Specifically, this happens in it seems to happen in Ontario the most, when in saying grace before meals, which, by the way, I don't even, if you say that to people in Vancouver at least, like, no one knows what you're talking about. Like oh, you're talking about itself? Yeah, we just call it the Bless Us, O Lord. We don't call it grace before meals.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so
you guys are weird.
Yeah, so what I'm talking about is when people say grace before meals, bless us, O Lord, and these like us, and it's just like, if you're one of those people, name another prayer that you do that for.
Our Father,
exactly. and related, it's just a PSA. It's bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts, not for these thy gifts. Yeah. So this is just a PSA, because if you think about it, if it's for, it's either bless us, O Lord, on behalf of these gifts, or bless us, O Lord, because these are your gifts. Yeah. And neither makes sense. It's bless us and these gifts. Anyways.
Yes, I know that's been something that has always been on your mind. Like,
always. I don't bring it up as frequently now, but it's something I always notice. And then it was at your birthday when you did it. I was like,
yeah,
it trips me up.
Well, it's hilarious, and I think you're right to bring it up. I mean, I did it on purpose just to annoy you that time. But you did correct me, like, actually, because originally I was someone who said, "Bless us, O Lord, for these thy gifts," and now I've started saying, "Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts." And I think you're totally right. You know, for that to
actually, a friend of mine, because he would actually went to look for the roots of the prayer back to the Latin, and confirmed that it's "and."
So just in case anyone else wanted to challenge you,
exactly.
That's hilarious. Anything else that you wanted to bring up in terms of pet peeves or pro tips?
One last one is usage of phones during mass.
Sure.
Or in the church at all. I think so. The exception is when you're using the iBreviary app to pray, or when you're using your phone to pray. You know, if you're using it for an examination of conscience, using it to pray, power to you. You know, like, that's totally fine. It's when people are using it to socialize. That's something I have no patience for that. You know, what's the point? Why are you at the church if you're not paying attention? You know, we need to be able to give an hour of our time a week to the Lord, like, actually give that time, and not just, oh, but I have plans. So that's one that really grinds my gears. So if you're one of those people, just, you know, make that consideration. I guarantee you have no plans in life that are so important that they can't wait an hour before you get back to your friend.
Yeah, no, and I think that brings us to kind of our two takeaways from this episode. We already talked about being reverent. I don't want to go too much more into that, but just to rehash it, like, every single one of these, whether it was a pet peeve, whether it was a pro tip, it's really just a call to kind of question your intentions of the things that you're doing, which is very, again, I say this every time, but it's very in line with the theme of our podcast, is the things that you've been doing, examine the intent behind them. And so whether it's applauding, whether it's genuflecting, I forgot this to bring these things up, but like, nodding your head at the name of Jesus, again, another show of reverence, dressing well for mass. I don't know if you have more to say on this, but like for me, like Eric Wong, our previous guest, like literally as recently as 2 months ago, like he called me out because I wore tiros, so like joggers, I guess, Adidas jogger pants to Sunday mass. And he was like, you should not be wearing that to Sunday mass. And I was like, I don't have an argument, so I will stop doing that. Dressing well, because that's part of your show. Your part of your showing up to meet Jesus with kind of your best, look on, kind of thing, right? So everything, having mass outside. Sorry, what am I saying? Having your phones on and using them, within the sanctuary or the church. All of these things is a call to question yourselves about how reverent you're being. I'm trying to think right now whether or not that's related to your pet peeve of naming your prayer before praying it. I guess maybe
not really. That's
so everything except
that's really just a pet peeve.
but reverence is really a real thing to consider. When it comes to your form of worship and your prayer life, I think.
Yeah.
The other takeaway. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say for dressing well, and this is actually something that I need to do better with as well. But one way that it's been described to me, and I think it really puts it into perspective, makes it really hard for me to have any excuses for why I don't do better with this, is you dress up every day for work. Why would you care more about how you look for work than how you look for Jesus?
Yeah.
Like that I think is like, it takes the cake in terms of just arguments for why we should dress well for church. It's not necessarily saying you need to be in a suit and tie every Sunday. If you are, power to you. Mm-hmm. But dressing well, looking presentable for your date with Jesus, I think is important.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for expanding on that. And so I think, like I said off the top, this is intended to be a fun episode, the way we framed it and everything. But I think an important reminder is that, if you are someone who has started noticing these things that kind of grind your gears, and, maybe you have your own pet peeves that are either the same as me and Andrew's, or you have your own that are different. The most important thing is that you don't allow yourself to actually be distracted by these things. Mm-hmm. Whether it's during mass or whether it's just your prayer life in general or how you interact with other people as a brother or sister in Christ. Because, yes, there are people around us who might be applauding after mass. There are people around us who are maybe in music ministry and like they sing off key or something. Or, there are babies who are crying in the congregation. Or maybe you notice that like the sound of all the kneelers dropping is like a bunch of bombs dropping or something. Whatever it is, the most important part of this is we are there to worship the Lord. And so, if you're starting to think too much about these things, you're allowing yourself to become distracted. Again, whether it's during mass or whether it's in the middle of your prayer life, whatever it is. And it's a great irony because I bring this particular takeaway up after us having listed all of our little pet peeves and pro tips and everything. But I truly believe that this is actually the most important part of the episode here, is that, Jesus is the most important thing in your life. Everything could be like totally off around you within the context of the mass. Maybe an altar server put something in the wrong spot or something and you notice that. But as long as you are focused on the Lord and being in communion through the sacrament, then all of those things don't matter, right? It's you and God, just the two of you, and that's what matters the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really a great point. I think with all of this, it's fine to notice, and it's fine to even kind of take note. I don't think that's the end of the world, but the question is what you do with that. Does it turn into a like, oh my gosh, like Jason was on his phone and you just think about that for the next hour, right? Or is it, oh, Jason was on his phone, I'll talk to him about that after mass. And then you move on, right? So I think that's kind of the piece. We've all met that, grumpy old person at church who says something to you about wearing a short sleeve shirt and just like gets mad at you. And it's fair point, but we don't want to be that person. We don't want to be that person who like clearly just eats away at us, because like you said, it's beyond a distraction. It actually puts us into the wrong direction, right? Now we spent the time that we could have spent turning ourselves towards God, like turning ourselves away from God. So I think it's fine to notice. Don't beat yourself up if you get annoyed, but just move on, right?
Have you read the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis?
I haven't.
So I'm only like 1/10 of the way in, and this was 5 months ago, as it goes with my spiritual reading. But one of the let me explain the premise of the Screw Tape Letters first, really quickly. The idea is that C.S. Lewis has written all these kind of little letters from essentially, I believe it's from Satan, like the perspective of Satan, to kind of
it's a senior demon, I think it is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so a senior demon to kind of like the minion demons, and it's the senior demon kind of being like, hey, like this is how you lead this person to sin. This is how you take away this person from God. And so one of these letters is within, like, specifically relating to this, of being like, hey, my minion demon, go to this person who is in the middle of mass and kind of within their mind emphasize all of these little distractions that are going on around him. Make him notice that baby crying a little bit more. Make him notice the person who is singing off key, kind of thing. And I bring this up because it's extremely relevant to what we're trying to say here, where, hey, it's also a call to be on guard against things that could just tempt us, right? Tempt us to, whether it's the farther end of like sinful thoughts of being proud, of wishing ill upon others, kind of thing, or even just allowing ourselves to be distracted and allowing ourselves to be taken away from God. I think that's very much what we're getting at here, both me and Andrew. And so, yeah, I thought that particular part of the Screw Tape Letters, again, by C.S. Lewis, was very insightful. I think the book itself, at least the first 10th of it that I've read, has been very insightful. And so I think just to end this off here, right, like you already touched a bit upon it, but if you do find yourself distracted and irritated, I think our best advice to you is probably just, don't judge others, right? Don't go and sit on your high horse, being like, hey, this person did it wrong, or this person is really annoying, which is, again, another great irony of this particular episode, the first 2/3 of it. And I think really the biggest thing is just stop yourself, ask for the Holy Spirit, invite the Holy Spirit to come and join you, and just pray to God and be like, hey, I've noticed within myself that I'm feeling a little, upset about these things, or I'm being distracted by these things. Just pray for charity, pray for an open heart, pray for love, to love the person instead. And for you to be able to work on these flaws, I think is really the approach here.
Yeah, well, they're all opportunities for growth, right? At the end of the day, it's like, how much does it really matter that the Nuler banged a little bit loud?
Yeah.
Like, is that really going to make or break my way to heaven? Like, probably not. So, how are we taking a bump in the road and turning it into a mountain, right? It is kind of what it is. And yeah, so I think all of us can always take these opportunities to be like, why? Like, I know that it's annoying, but why was I so annoyed?
Yeah.
Right? And that kind of a thing, and then move forward that way.
Any other parting thoughts from you before we cap this off?
I just lost audio for some reason.
Oh, I just said any parting thoughts from you before we cap this off?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So, if you are someone who are doing the things that we listed, maybe we invite you to consider the things that we've been sharing. But again, most importantly, if you're someone who has already been noticing these things and are allowing yourself to be distracted, maybe that's also something for you to think about and pray about as well, right? So I think that wraps it up. Again, our last episode of the year. We're entering Christmas again. By the time this is up, or by the time you listen, Christmas may have passed. So we wish you a very Merry Christmas, maybe even a Happy New Year. By the time you hear from us, it will be 2022. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you so much for listening along for this year. We'll be back in a few weeks, and so until then, all the best to you. And again, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone.